Thanks for downloading this episode of the Resilient Advisor Podcast. My name is Jay Coulter. Today, I'm going to interview Julie Littlechild, who's a repeat guest on the show, and I invited her back on because of a blog post she put out on what makes a client experience extraordinary, and challenges you to think about how your practice stacks up. Now, Julie is a thought leader on client engagement for financial advisors, a prolific speaker, writer, and she does her own research. Her firm, Absolute Engagement, helps advisors tailor their client experience. She's worked with and studied successful advisors and their clients for more than 20 years, and she's also the co-host of the Becoming Referable podcast. Julie, thanks for coming back on.
Oh, thanks so much, Jay. It's great to be here.
All right, so the client experience is the cornerstone of any advisory practice. You lay out a series of steps that build a framework for financial advisors as they think about their client experience. Would you mind walking us through this fantastic framework?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, this whole idea of the framework is interesting in and of itself because I think we hear so many ideas, don't we? We're hear strategies and tactics, but just having a roadmap and a clear framework so that you can figure out what you need to do and what you need to do next seems to be really resonating. And the framework that we mapped out just identifies those steps that we believe every advisor needs to think about. First of all, if they're laying a strong foundation, which would probably be the first part of this. But then secondly, if they're moving into consider a more differentiated and engaging client experience. So we quite literally walk through 11 different steps that looks at vision, that looks at laying the foundation, that looks at client journey mapping, managing expectations, and measuring your success over time. And that constitutes the overall framework.
Excellent. So the first step that you lay out is defining your niche or ideal client. Could we go a little bit deep on defining your niche? Because that's something that I find advisors really struggle with. How do you lead them down the path?
I find that as well, by the way, and it's led me to state my opinion on this, but also recognize that not everybody's going to get there. So in a way, the first step, which we do call define your niche or ideal client, is really about understanding who you're designing the client experience to support. Because everything's going to come back to their needs and challenges and wants. So we really do need some clarity. Now, personally, I love the approach of having a really well-defined niche market. And it makes all of this so much easier. My one caveat on that is if an advisor is uncomfortable with that approach, I hate to lose everything else. So I would say identify it at a minimum an important or perhaps your critical client segment and begin to design around that group. But it all does come back to the fact that we can't design an extraordinary experience around the needs of everyone. We need to get some clarity.
Is it fair to say, Julie, based on your experience, that advisors that build successful practices today, and I'm not talking about advisors that had built them in the past, they tend to have niches. In fact, almost always have some type of ideal client they're going after, don't they?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And in fact, I would say the way that I like to define niche is either as a target client or a technical specialization. I think it can be either, but the point is the same. It brings people back and it allows a client to come to a website or come to a meeting or walk in your office and go, oh, okay, I'm home. This business was built for me. And I absolutely agree that this is part of where we're seeing the industry going.
All right, so your second step involves segmenting your clients. There's lots of different philosophies out there about how to segment. What do you recommend?
Well, and in fact, I would say the next few steps in the process are all about laying a foundation. It's not even about differentiation at this point. It's just about being able to deliver an appropriate level of service consistently over time. And I do think it starts with segmentation. And here I'm looking at segmentation based on the value of the client. We get into needs and other ways to look at it, but in this case, it is very much about aligning the scope of the offer to the value of the client to ensure that it's both meaningful and profitable. So we do take advisors who are looking to lay that foundation through a step-by-step process to figure out what your drivers of value are, how to rate clients, and how to put them into a set of key segments. And it's really at that point where it moves into the third step, which is, what does it mean to be an A client or a B or a C? What's the frequency of contact, the scope of the offer, and so on and so forth, that I'm going to align with that segment.
Why do you think most advisors, teams, and firms don't go through that process proactively? Why they end up coming to consultants and coaches like us to have that mapped out?
Well, and it's an interesting one because, so many advisors will tell me, yeah, I've segmented my clients, but they often need to revisit that and make sure that the segmentation model actually aligns with the goal of the business. And, I think because we just get into the business and we start delivering as much as we can to everybody. So it's almost like we walk down the wrong path for all of the right reasons, right? We want to help people, but then we hit that wall, right? Where we realize we're either over investing in some, or things are falling through the cracks, or the business isn't as profitable as it needs to be. And that takes us back to the fundamentals.
Excellent. So after your clients are segmented in the framework that you lay out, next you're creating your service matrix and then also assessing the capacity and profitability. I'm assuming you tie those two together.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about doing the math, and it's amazing how easy it is to forget. We can create this beautiful service matrix, and then without actually going deep on it, realize that in fact we don't have the capacity to deliver, or we just don't have the right types of roles in the business to deliver on it. So we've just got to do the math.
Yeah, we also overlay a stress test after somebody builds out their matrix, just to make sure they have enough human capital hours to deliver on what they're promising.
Yeah. And it's an interesting process because it also tells you, of course, where on the team the roadblock is. If the roadblock is with the advisor, then hiring and that advisor can't meet clients and do the technical work enough, then hiring another assistant may not be the answer, because that person can't necessarily break through. But if the advisor is doing too much admin work, then absolutely that's the answer. So it gives you a sense of who you need to hire and where you need to focus.
And it seems like that speaks to your next step, which is co-creating the client experience and then mapping out the client journey.
Yeah, once we've got that foundation in place, I think of the first few steps as sort of the satisfaction zone, if you will. It's what it takes to have a satisfied client. And then we move into the engagement zone. And that's where it's about going beyond satisfaction. And it does start with co-creation in my mind. And that is co-creating the client experience, both with your team and with your clients, getting a deeper understanding of what extraordinary really looks like through the eyes of your clients so that you can design something amazing. And the way that we design that is that next step, mapping out the client journey. It's an approach to designing client experience. It's not a tactic. But what that does is allows you to step back, to take in all of those insights you got from the co-creation phase and look at the client's journey and truly design an innovative client experience based on what they're thinking and feeling and doing, which often has nothing to do with you.
And then it looks like the rubber really meets the road as you create that client communications plan. What does that look like?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the key here is creating a client communications plan is not an unusual thing to do. But what we're really hoping advisors think about is, are those communications directly aligned back with the client journey and the co-creation phase? So we're looking for alignment. And when you approach it in this way, what happens is we tease out innovative ways to support clients. So that is very much where we're thinking about, what communications are we sending? What events are we running? What kind of education? What kind of appreciation? but in every case, filtering it back through the client's journey and what they truly need to progress.
And you map that out every 12 months?
Well, I think it's always worth looking at every 12 months. I mean, the client's journey itself probably won't change, but going back and just asking yourself a question of how can we be increasingly innovative in how we support clients, perhaps drawing on feedback if you're gathering that, then absolutely you're going to look to refresh it at least annually.
Okay. And the next step in your framework involves structuring the business around the ideal client. Tell us what you mean by that.
Yeah, what I'm thinking there is really everything other than communications. So again, with this idea of alignment, that everything we do should be designed to support that ideal client. When we talk about communications, that's fairly obvious, but I also think it's baked right into the business. So what skills do you have? What skills do your team have? What's your office environment? What external partnerships do you have in place? What does your digital presence look like? So it's a step of auditing your business, really stepping back, looking at it from the outside in and saying, are we doing things this way because of who our client is, or are we just doing things this way because? And that is what we think about when we look at structuring the business around the ideal client.
And that clearly dovetails into the next step, which is defining your core processes.
Yeah, look, we all know we need a consistent way to deliver, and we've put that as step 9 because we've spent a lot of time prior to that really figuring out what those processes are. So whether that is just the process of meeting and conducting your reviews in a timely manner, or whether it's the process of onboarding or executing on your communications plan, it goes without saying that I think we need to consider workflows and how that's baked into our business.
And then when you talk about managing client expectations, what's the framework for that? What expectations need to be managed in this framework?
Well, there I'm thinking about it. At this point in the framework, you've really mapped out the plan, the communications plan, everything from frequency of contact to process to communications to other value-added things that you're doing for clients. So this is simply about communicating that. I mean, we all know it's important. We all forget to do it, but there is a really tight correlation in terms of what we've seen between not just delivering a really high level of service, but clients understanding what to expect. So this is about telling them, it's about tapping into whether you're hitting the mark and ensuring they're always clear on exactly what they can expect.
Perfect. And then the last step is to gather client feedback, which I find very few advisors are comfortable doing. How do you set that up?
And this is so important, and I've lived my life in this space, so I've seen it in action. Different ways to do it. And in fact, I've really expanded the way we support advisors on client feedback as well, because I think quantitative feedback is absolutely important. It's a way of measuring your success. I also think client feedback feeds in, if you will, to other points in this framework in a qualitative way. Interviewing clients to understand what extraordinary looks like, perhaps having an advisory board or running focus groups. So there are different touch points, but we put it at the end simply as a way to say, look, you're doing all this work. You need to know if it's resonating with your clients, and you need to know if anything is shifting that would suggest you need to change the way that you're doing it. So I don't know how we can function without some form of client feedback.
I could not agree more. Julie, I love this framework. That's why I wanted to do a podcast on it. In the original blog post, there was an assessment that advisors could take to measure their practice. I'm going to include links to that in the show notes. Tell advisors, A, where they could find it if they're in front of their computer now, and B, what to expect from that assessment.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a fairly simple assessment. We wanted to put this framework into an assessment format so that you could just go through and essentially self-report on where you were, with the idea that it would give you that place to start, of a first step in refining or defining your client experience. And you can find that on the blog, and that's where you find most of what we do, frankly, whether it's releasing new research. That's at absoluteengagement.com/blog, and you can click right through to the assessment there, or perhaps on your page as well.
Excellent. Julie, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this great framework.
Thanks so much.